Good morning, Mountain View. Welcome to the November 1st, 2020 Sunday morning worship service of Mountain View Bible Fellowship. It's good to see everyone here today. It's been a little while since I've been here, and I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm glad that everyone else is here too. Let's stand together and worship the Lord. Oh, one thing that I should have said, I should have mentioned, we're going to have communion today, so if you did not pick up your communion kit on the way in, feel free to go out and grab one. They're out by the doors. You'll need that if you want to participate in communion. Now let's worship the Lord together.
And Well, good morning. Isn't it great to be here again on Sunday? Chris is not going to be here today, so I'm going to give you a quick search team announcement. But you know, when Chris comes up, a lot of times he has a little list of stuff that he reads. So I just want to warn you that I got a bag full here. So as they say in Texas, y'all better get comfortable. As far as the search team update goes, tomorrow we'll again meet on Monday afternoon and get back to studying a couple of new resumes that have come in from potential candidates. And we've already had two, for those of you who don't know, we've already had two Zoom interviews with candidates, and we're looking forward to another one when we had to cancel last week. So we'll get back to that and keep looking for the pastor that God would have us for Mountain View. So about a month ago, when this fire started, Sarah and I realized we didn't have a list of stuff, just in case we would ever have to evacuate. So I came up with a list of stuff and revised it several times, thinking that I would never need it. And as you can tell, it's all scratched up and even extended to the backside. So pickup and Jeep and trailer and stuff were all loaded, and we got out of here the day that it looked like Armageddon was coming. So I'm certainly glad that I did that. And then I think we got back here on Wednesday and started unpacking some of this stuff. And I don't know about you, but when you have to pack, and it comes down to that time when it looks like, really, it looks like hell was breaking loose above us here that day. You just start putting things in, right? You get all the stuff you have on your list, and then the box isn't quite full, and you just start throwing stuff in. So I threw a few things in that when I started unpacking this week, I had no idea they were in there. Anybody recognize how old this ever-ready flashlight might be? This was my dad's flashlight. The reason I remember it was because I always had to hold it when he was out on a call fixing an appliance. And that, I didn't have it on my list, but somewhere along the line it was on my bedstand. I threw that into one of my bags. I didn't know I was going to do that. The other thing that was on the top of a box, I don't know if you can read that. Lynn, that's me. I don't know if any of you recognize where this might have come from, but this was on my desk. But where it originally came from, we used to come up to Estes Park in the 70s and 80s all the time, from Iowa and Minnesota. And over in Grand Lake, we discovered on the west side, Timber Creek Campground, and we used to stay over there all the time. So you would go in and get supplies at Grand Lake. And on the south side of the main street of Grand Lake, there was an old barn, it used to be an old stable, and a guy had set up 2 or 3 band saws. And for just like $3 or $4, you could give him your name, go shopping in Grand Lake, come back an hour and a half later, and he would have cut your name out of an aspen log. That little name tag, I guess you'd say, has sat on every desk at every place I have ever worked. That is one of my most prized possessions. But by far the number one thing at the top of my list, at the top of Sarah's list, was my Bible and her Bible. So would you join me in prayer today? Lord, I'm not sure which of the original 6 days was that you created snow. But we thank you for it. Today, Father, as we cautiously recover from the fires that are still around us, it has become abundantly clear that our most important possession is our salvation through your Son, Jesus Christ. None of our list items that we make are important. None of these can we take with us into eternal life with you. Lord, this morning we want to thank all the firefighters, the law enforcement, the helicopter and airplane pilots, everyone that was involved in fighting the fires. And all of the people that provided us in Estes Park with help and accommodations as we were evacuees. Keep us diligent today and aware as we wait for the fires to be put out totally. Help us to remember that your most important possession is you. Be with Wayne today as he delivers our message from Luke and maybe gives us a glimpse into John. We thank you, Lord, for being with us this morning. Amen.
Hoping everybody will be able to see the light. I'll be ready now. Wow, look at how many people. It's good, isn't it? Thank you for being here. We were gathered together this morning an hour early just to be together as those who would gather, those who could come earlier. A lot's happened since the last time we were sitting here, probably for all of us. I don't know if everyone in this room had to evacuate. Did you guys have to evacuate in California?
We evacuated in Colorado.
Can you believe the whole diversity here? What a joy. So lots happened. I appreciate Lynn. I appreciate you just addressing what we all had to face. So, thank you. I'm going to use the whiteboard. That's why it's there. I hope it'll work. In our reading for this week, we were to read from Luke 14 through John 3. And some of us received an email from Fred, whose email went down in the middle of the week, but he still was able to correspond with just a group of us who correspond with each other throughout the week. Just as pertaining to how things are at the church and what do we need to address, is there anything going on? And of course this week there was a lot going on. And so Fred said the coronavirus is also gathering some attention, some increased attention here in Colorado these days. And so there was a concern. This isn't to alarm anyone, but there's a concern. Are they going to shut us down again? Don't know. And I'm not even going to really spend any time on that. But if there's a threat that they will, then we need to be sure we meet. So for sure we're gathering together. Even if people are still evacuated, we made this decision while it was still possible, people were still evacuated. For sure we're going to meet on Sunday because we don't know if we'll be able to meet next Sunday. We never know anyway, of course. So that's why we're meeting now. But we decided we'll get together earlier for our Sunday school hour and just talk and then pray together. And so there were a group of us, your brothers and sisters, who gathered this morning, just sort of debriefing of what's gone on our particular lives, probably all of us have a story of some sort relating to the evacuation. Of some sort, anyway. So we gathered together, we chatted, and we prayed, because we're family, and we're a body. And dwelling in unity, talking with each other, discussing what's happened, praying together, being real, is essential. Especially during these days. I'm not political. In fact, as Patty and I talked about, I guess I can say this publicly, as Patty and I were talking about things that have been going on for months in America, and things got pretty intense, and I don't know that the intensity has diminished at all. I began thinking, my goal is not to save America, whatever that would mean and whatever America should look like. My goal is the righteousness of God. And I want to continue to stand there as well. At the same time, I want us to recognize and acknowledge that where we live, and that we have the opportunity to vote on Tuesday. And so I'm just going to, and I told the students, there were a bunch of chalet people here this morning, and I told the students to vote, and then afterwards I thought, well, unless you have an absentee ballot, there's a good possibility you're not going to be able to by Tuesday. But for many of you, it would be your first chance to vote for the President of the United States. I said this morning in Sunday school. A house divided cannot stand. You know who said that? Anybody know who said that? Sunday school people do. We chatted about it. Pardon? Abraham Lincoln said it. He said it in 1858 when he was running for senator of Illinois against Stephen Douglas, and he lost. But slavery was right there. It was a major issue. And that's when he said, a house divided cannot stand. Actually, Sam Houston said it in 1850, before Abraham Lincoln said it, when it was called the Compromise of 1850. It was after the Mexican-American War. And suddenly the United States had more states, and some of them were pro-slavery and some of them were anti-slavery. And how are we going to welcome them all in? And how are we going to still be one union? Some are anti, some are pro. What do we do? How do we do this? And there was a compromise that took place. And Sam Houston said, a house divided cannot stand. Like Houston, Texas. But of course, Jesus said it first, as far as we know, right? When the religious leaders said, you healed that man who was mute and couldn't speak and was deaf, who had a demon in him. You healed him for sure, but you healed him by Satan. You didn't heal him by God. You are not the Son of God. You are the son of Satan. That's what they said about Jesus. That's what the Sanhedrin said about Jesus. You're not the Son of God, you're the son of Satan. And as a nation, that's when they rejected him as Messiah. When the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, dropped the gavel and said, guilty. It was at that moment that they said, you are not the Messiah. Many people believe, but it's when the Sanhedrin, it's when the Supreme Court said, son of Satan, that the decision was made. You as a nation have rejected me as Messiah. And there's a lot to discuss in light of that. And that's when Jesus said, wait. This man was possessed by a demon, and now you're saying that Satan, the demon comes from Satan, and now you're saying Satan casts out Satan? That doesn't make any sense. If Satan casts himself out, then his kingdom will crumble. That's what Jesus says when he says, the kingdom divided cannot stand. That's what's going on. Well, who knows what's going to happen Tuesday? Only God. Who knows what's going to happen after Tuesday, as whatever the result of the election is? Only God knows. I don't know. But since I've got a microphone hanging from my ear, and I'm standing in front of you, and Tuesday is an election day, I encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity we have in America and vote. And I encourage you to think carefully about the issues and vote according to the Lord who indwells you. That would be my encouragement. So we were to read through John chapter 3. Now, knowing that we might not have church next week, I'm believing we will. I mean, why wouldn't we? But anything can happen. I knew that while we were going through the 4 Gospels, I wanted us to study the Passover together. And I mentioned this in the one call that we'll be studying the Passover. And so that's what we're going to do. And Ravencrest students, that's what we'll be doing together tomorrow morning, actually. So you're going to have to study twice. I hope that's okay. But the Passover is actually in all of the Gospels, but in particular, since we were going through Luke 22 in our reading, that's where I wanted us to go. So we may be a little longer this morning, brethren, because there are a few things to do. We're going to have this study, and it'll take a little while. We're going to have communion at the end. We had communion together last week, electronically. We'll be having it again this morning together. And as Russ said, be sure you get your packet, and if you don't have one, I'll allot time for you to get one. Turn to Luke chapter 22, please. We're going to read a lot this morning. Luke chapter 22. This is the night before Jesus goes on the cross the next morning. There's so much that happens, and maybe next Sunday we'll talk about, as we were going through John, or maybe the week after, we'll see the chronology of all that happens in Jesus' life from the night he has his Passover meal until the next morning when he goes on the cross. So much happens during those 12 hours. Maybe we'll talk about that next week or the week after. We'll see. But this is Jesus having a Passover with his apostles. Now, I think I've said this to us together, that Jesus had 4 Passovers with his apostles. He went public around 30 years old on a Passover. See, now for Passover, in the law of Moses, Passover was one of the 3 Levitical Levite feasts when all of the young men needed to go to Jerusalem. There were 7 Levitical feasts. On 3 of them, all the young men need to go to Jerusalem. Commanded. Which means they have to leave their homes, they have to leave their farms, they have to leave their families, or they may bring their families and go to Jerusalem for the Passover. It happens 3 times. Passover is actually not one, it's the next feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but they're just one day apart. So they're combined, and all the young men and many families would come to Jerusalem for the Passover. In other words, the whole nation is gathered there. Jesus went public on the Passover. He said, "I'm the Messiah and I am here," on Passover. And it was at that Passover that he turned over the tables. He actually did it twice. He did it on his first Passover, being public, and he did it on his last Passover, being public. He turned over the tables. I believe 2 times. So he went public on a Passover, and then he had a second Passover, then he had a third Passover, and then he went to the cross on a Passover. And it's the Passover when he goes to the cross that we're going to look at. He has had Passover every year of his life. If he died at 33, which is kind of what we think, he'd have 33 Passovers every year according to the law of Moses. And every year his apostles would have had Passover as well. Okay, verse 1, Luke chapter 22. Now the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how they might put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. And Satan entered into Judas. Did you know that? Did you know that Satan entered Judas? In order for Jesus to actually get on the cross, Satan was very much involved. Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12. And he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray Jesus to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. And he consented and began seeking a good opportunity to betray him to them apart from the multitude. Then came the first day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." And they said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" And he said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, Jerusalem, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house that he enters, and you shall say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room in which we may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large furnished upper room. Prepare it there." They departed and found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when the hour had come, he reclined at the table with the apostles. And he said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I shall never again eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, "Take this and share it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the kingdom of God comes." And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of the one betraying me is with me on the table. For indeed the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed." And they began to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who was going to do this thing. Stop there. That's Luke's record of the Passover. Matthew, Mark, and John all recorded it as well. Now, if we wanted to see where Passover really began, right? See, Jesus has been doing it for 33 years. In fact, the children of Israel have been doing it since when? Since when have the children of Israel had Passover?
Since they left Egypt.
Pardon?
Since they left Egypt.
Since they left Egypt. When did they leave Egypt? Where in the Bible will we find that the children of Israel left Egypt? Exodus. That's the book. What chapter in Exodus will we find it? Correct. Please turn there. Exodus chapter 12. We're going to read quite a bit. This is the Passover. My guess is many of you, and of course I know my Ravencrest students know because we've been together a few days and you've heard me mention Passover, so I know you've heard of it. But my guess is that many of you, or all of you sitting here, before this morning have heard the word Passover. And in your Christian life, it has floated through your world in some manner. I'm just guessing. Now that's a Jewish feast. And it's possible, maybe even probable, that you didn't grow up keeping the Passover. And yet it's flowed through, it's passed through your lives as believers. In other words, it's significant in the life of a believer. But why? Why has it flowed through your life? Why does it have any significance for you as a Christian who doesn't have possibly any Jewish root, any Jewish blood? Why does a Passover play any role in your life? Hopefully we'll see as we go through our study this morning. Exodus chapter 12. What's happened in Exodus thus far? The children of Israel have been in Egypt. How long? How long have they been in Egypt? 400 years. Just the way God promised to Abraham when he was Abram. You'll be enslaved for 400 years, and after 400 years, you'll come out. And when you come out, you'll have the possessions of the people of the land as well. That's what God told Abram back in Genesis chapter 15. That's precisely what happened in Exodus chapter 12. Children of Israel have been in Egypt for 400 years. At just the perfect time, God talks to Moses, who's living in the Midian desert, in the wilderness. And he's been there for 40 years. He's 80 years old. And at the perfect time, God says, Moses, it's time now. It's 400 years. I want you to go back to Egypt, because that's where he came from. I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to go to Pharaoh and says, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. And I want my firstborn son out. Moses, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh that. But I know, Moses, that Pharaoh's not going to let you out except under compulsion. He's not going to say, oh, okay. Because, Israel is like his primary source of economic well-being. Those are his slaves. So he's not going to let you go so quickly, Moses. So Moses knew that in advance. So Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, thus says the Lord, I want my son out. Pharaoh says, no. So the Nile River turns to blood. Moses goes to Pharaoh a second time and says, God says, I want my people out. Pharaoh says, no. So the land is covered with frogs. By the way, so after the land is covered with frogs, Pharaoh calls his magicians and says, can you do anything about this? The land is covered with frogs, covered, and the frogs are beginning to die, and it's beginning to smell, and Pharaoh calls his magicians and says, can you do anything about this? And you know what the magicians did? Anybody know? They made more frogs. Because they couldn't get rid of what God did. They could only sort of duplicate it. They couldn't do anything original. Because they were the sons of the devil. They did function according to the devil. They couldn't do anything original. They gave Pharaoh more frogs. Nice work. And then those are the first 2 plagues, and then we get 7 more plagues, and we've got 9 plagues. Pharaoh says yes 3 times, changes his mind 3 times. And still the children of Israel haven't been able to get out. The crops are destroyed, livestock has been battered and beaten, and people have had boils on them, and they've been in deep darkness, and they've had gnats and flies on them, and the land is virtually destroyed. The land, the people, it's a mess. And Pharaoh still says, no, you can't get out. And then we come to the 10th and most awful plague. What is it? Death. Well, yes, but what? It's the death of the firstborn, of every firstborn male, human and cattle in Egypt. And you see what it ultimately is? God said in Exodus 4, Israel is my son, my firstborn. Go and tell Pharaoh that I want my firstborn son out. And since Pharaoh won't allow God's firstborn son out, what does it cost Pharaoh?
All the firstborn.
His firstborn son. It's an exchange of firstborn for firstborn, is what it is. Okay, Exodus 12, start in verse 1. I'm going to read quite a bit. 10th and most awful plague. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's households, a lamb for each household. Now if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them. According to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Stop there, please. Let's look at some of the details. I hope you guys can see it here. Let's look at some of the details. And I'm going to write it as large as I can, so you can see it over there. Lamb. Detail number 1, a lamb. Right? And the lamb is to be unblemished, spotless. Okay? Can come from the sheep or the goats. The lamb is to be set apart on the 10th day of a month called Aviv, or Aviv. It's set apart on the 10th day of Abib, and it is examined basically until the 14th day of Abib. That's a Hebrew month, and it's the first month of the year for the children of Israel. You set it aside for 4 days in order to be sure that your lamb is unblemished. And on the 14th, you kill it. And you kill it at the doorway of the house. So you put the blood, well, you kill it at the doorway of the house, right here, on the 14th. Okay, that's as far as we've got. Let's keep going. Verse 7. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. Stop there. So you take the blood and you put it on the lintel, which is the top, right? Here's your door, the lintel, and the 2 doorposts, the side. You put the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts of the house. That's where you put the blood. Okay, so you kill the lamb at the threshold, is the word later on in Exodus 12, at the threshold of the door of your house, and you take the blood and put it on the lintel and doorposts. This is what God has told the children of Israel to do. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 8. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs, along with its entrails. And you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. You'll eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. It might be like Thursday afternoon. We got to get out of town. Maybe we can just eat a sandwich first. Loins girded, sandals in your hand, sandals on your feet, staff in your hand. Computer in the car, trailer hitched up, ready to go. Maybe we can just have a sandwich. Ready to go. That's the way they're to eat it. In haste. Verse 12. I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Hence the name, Passover. When I see the blood, I will pass over. No plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. The children of Israel are to celebrate this feast as long as they are the children of Israel. And they still do. March 27th, I think, 2021. 2021, March 27th, will be Passover. And you can be assured, if we're still on earth, who knows, right? No, we will be, because we discussed our eschatology a few weeks ago. March 27th, 2021, you can be assured that the majority of Jews around the world will be celebrating this Passover. But they won't necessarily put the blood on the lintel and doorposts. They won't necessarily set a lamb aside from the 10th to the 14th. They won't necessarily kill the lamb at the threshold, at the doorway of the house. This March 27th, they don't need to. It's just to remember what happened then. So every year we keep the Passover meal. Okay. Skip down to verse 21. Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families and slay the Passover. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin. That word basin is threshold. And apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And none of you shall go outside of this house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. You shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. And it will come about when you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he has promised you, that you shall observe this rite. And it will come about when your children will say to you, what does this rite mean to you? Then you shall say, it is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes. And the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. In other words, every Egyptian home had a dead firstborn. I'm not sure if it would have worked this way, but the last Passover I had with my father, before he died, if it worked this way, if it had been that night in Egypt, three of us would have died. My father would have died, I would have died, and my son Joseph would have died as being firstborn sons. If that's the way, that was the last Passover I had. So it might have worked that way. There may have been more than one person in many of the homes. But there was, every home in Egypt had a dead firstborn. Verse 31. And Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go and worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go and bless me also. And the Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot. About 600,000 men on foot, aside from women and aside from children. And a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with the flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. Stop there. The children of Israel went out with gold, silver, precious stones, blue, purple, scarlet material, fine twisted linen, ram skins dyed red, porpoise skins, goat hair. That's what they went out with. Because, soon after they got out, about a year later, like 3 months later, it took 3 months to get to Mount Sinai. It took 3 months to get to the wilderness of Sinai. And while they were in the wilderness of Sinai, they built something. Do you know what they built? The tabernacle. And you know what the tabernacle was made of? Gold, silver, bronze, precious stones, fine linen, blue, purple, scarlet material, ram skins dyed red, porpoise skins, goat hair. It was like a palace on shoulders, because that's how they carried it. They built a palace on shoulders. Now, where did they get all that stuff? They were slaves. Where'd they get it? Where'd they get gold? Where'd they get precious stones? They were slaves. Where'd they get it? Pardon? From the Egyptians. God said, go and ask the Egyptians. And the Egyptians gave it to him. He built a tabernacle. He built a palace on shoulders. And then did you see how many men came out? 600,000? Approximately 600,000. The book of Numbers tells us it's 603,550. You, men, young men. I don't think they counted me. And they didn't count women. And Moses, didn't count children. So if you extrapolate up, you know how many people came out of Egypt? If you give every man a wife, because by the time you're your age, fellas, you're married. Then. And by the time you're your age, fellas, you probably got a couple of children. Then. So approximately this many people came out of Egypt. We'll go with 2,500,000. Approximately 2.5 million Jews came out of Egypt. How many went in? How many Jews went into Egypt with Jacob?
70.
70. How many came out? 2.5 million. What did God tell Abram? You're going to have a great nation. And that's precisely what happened while they were in Egypt. And now there's a great nation. So 2.5 million come out. But did you notice what it says? Besides the 2.5 million, look at verse 38. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock. Who else went out? Who else went out? A mixed multitude went up with them. Who's the them? Pardon?
The Jews.
The Jews. So who's the mixed multitude? Someone else. Egyptians probably, but others who are in Egypt. A multitude. They said, oh, Jehovah has got to be God. He must be God. We don't want these people to leave without us after these 10 plagues. So they go with them. A mixed multitude went as well, not just the children of Israel. One more tidbit I want you to see. Please go down to verse 46. This is a little more information about the Passover lamb. Verse 46, the Passover lamb is to be eaten in a single house. You are to not bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of the Passover lamb. No bone broken. Okay, now let's review Exodus chapter 12. What we've seen. Passover. Find an unblemished, spotless lamb, set it aside on the 10th, keep it until the 14th, make sure it's unblemished. Don't break any bones of it, kill it on the threshold of the house, put the blood on the lintel and doorposts of the house. That was Passover. When God comes to destroy the firstborn, as long as you're under the blood, He passes over you and nobody dies in your house and in your family. If you do not put the blood on the lintel and doorposts of your house, what happens? You know the answer to this.
Firstborn gets killed.
Firstborn dies. And it doesn't actually make a distinction. It doesn't actually distinguish between Israelite and a non-Israelite. I wonder, this is just a side thought, I wonder if there was an Egyptian family that said, look at what's happened to our land, and now I'm going to lose my firstborn. And this is pretty strange stuff, but I'm going to do it. Because look at all that's been done. I don't want to take a chance. I'm going to do it. I'm going to kill a lamb, and I'm going to put the blood on the lintel and doorposts because I don't want to lose my son. If an Egyptian did that, I kind of think that being under the blood, the son might be saved. Or if you're an Israelite, and you say, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do this. This is like bizarre. I think if you're an Israelite, you don't have the blood on the lintel and doorposts, you're not under the blood, I think the Israelite might lose the firstborn. I don't know, it doesn't teach that. Those are just my thoughts. Okay, so there we have it. There's your Passover. Great. What do we do with it? Okay, great. Children, Patty and I, we're going to have a Passover meal March 27th with our children, with our family. Great. What are we going to do with it? So what? What does it mean? Does it pertain? Does it teach us about Christ? We're not going to turn there, but if you went to Mark chapter 14, verse 1, and worked your way back to Mark chapter 11, which is the day that Jesus went into the city of Jerusalem, you would discover, and the city of Jerusalem considered the house of Israel, the home, you would discover that Jesus, on the triumphal entry, went into Jerusalem on the 10th of Nisan, or Abib. Went into Jerusalem on the 10th of Abib. That year that he went to the cross. He went into Jerusalem on the 10th of Abib. That was the day he rode the donkey. We call it Palm Sunday. It was the 10th of Abib. And if you worked your way forward in Mark, you would see that on the 14th of Nisan was the day that he went to the cross. 4 days. You know what happened during those 4 days? Turn to Matthew chapter 22, please. I feel like we've discussed this a little bit already. Matthew chapter 22. I'm just going to read through it. Matthew 22. This is occurring chronologically during these 4 days. Starting in verse 15. The Pharisees went and counseled together how they might trap Jesus and what he said. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. So you've got Pharisees and Herodians, two of the religious leading groups. They said, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and teach the way of God in truth and defer to no one, and you're not partial to any. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay Caesar's tax?" Jesus perceived their malice and said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites?" Because they are testing him. They don't believe that he teaches the way of God in truth. They don't believe he's truthful. They don't believe that he doesn't show partiality to any. They don't believe the things they've said. And they say, "Should we pay the poll tax to Caesar?" They're trying to trap him. If he says, "No, don't pay the tax to Caesar," then Caesar will have a reason to throw him in jail and hang him. If he says, "Yes, pay the tax to Caesar," then the children of Israel can say, "This isn't our Messiah," because our Messiah wouldn't say, "Bow down to Caesar." So there's no winning. It's a trap. He can't give them an answer, they think. So he says, "Show me the coin used for the poll tax." They brought him a denarius and he said to them, "Whose likeness, whose image is on this?" They said, "Caesar's." And he said, "And render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." Hearing this, they marveled and left him and went away. Show me the coin. Whose image is on there? Caesar. Oh, okay, then give Caesar what's his. But give to God the things that are God's. What do you think he might be saying? Where's God's image? Pardon? Like, when you say everywhere, Charlton, you mean... Where? Where's God's image? Pardon? People. Right? Day 6, he made man, and then let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Mankind is the image. Give Caesar, sure, give him his money, who cares? But give God that which is God's. The image of Caesar's on the coin, the image of God is on you. They don't know what to say. So they walk away. So the Sadducees decide to come. Verse 23. On that day, some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and questioned him, saying, "Teacher, Moses said if a man dies, having no children, his brother as next of kin shall marry his wife and raise up an offspring to his brother. Now there were 7 brothers with us, and the first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother, and so also the second, third, down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 shall she be? For they all had her." Jesus answered and said to them, "You're mistaken, not understanding the scriptures or the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. But regarding the resurrection of the dead, have you not read that which was spoken to you by God, saying, 'I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am the God of Jacob'? He's not the God of the dead, but of the living." When the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. The Sadducees say, look, she's had 7 husbands, all 7 brothers, and in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? What do you think of their question? Is it a legitimate question? Do they believe their question? Why not? They don't believe in the resurrection. It's not a real question. They're just trying to trap him. And then he says, don't you even see the scriptures that say, God says, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am the God of Jacob. Do you know what their status was when he said that? They were all dead. But they were still living. And so is God. There is definitely a resurrection. So then the Sadducees hightail it. So we come to verse 34. The Pharisees heard that he put the Sadducees to silence, and they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, saying, Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? He said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, and this is not a trick question, he's not trying to trap them, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said, he's the son of David. And Jesus said, well then, why does David, in the Spirit, call him Lord? Saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put thine enemies beneath thy feet. If David calls him Lord, then how is he his son? No one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to ask him another question. 4 days of testing, and guess what? Unblemished. Nothing wrong with this man. Something wrong with you guys, Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, teachers of the law. Nothing wrong with this guy. He's unblemished. Turn please to John chapter 19, which will be our reading for Vision 2020 next week. Not this week starting today, but next week. John chapter 19. Jesus is on the cross. Jesus has died. And you know how somebody dies on a cross, right? I think we talked about this here as well. The cross is a torture chamber. It's a place of torture. No mortal wound. If they put a nail through your wrist or a nail through your feet, that doesn't kill you. You put a nail through your heart, it kills you. Put a nail through your head, it kills you. Put a nail through your wrist, it doesn't kill you. You just hang. It's a form of torture. You just keep hanging and dying slowly and slowly and slowly and slowly. It's a form of torture. But also when you're on the cross, they might nail your feet to the cross so you can stand up and breathe. Because when you're on the cross and you're hanging, your diaphragm, you breathe, right? Your diaphragm drops, you inspire, then you breathe out, and your diaphragm comes up, diaphragm drops, makes space for breath. You're doing that the whole time. But when you're hanging on the cross, if you're like this, they nail your feet so you can take a breath. You can override your body's system and take your own breath that you need. So that's so kind of them to nail your feet to the cross so you can stay on there longer breathing. It's all torture, especially if your body's been shredded by metal shards and glass inside the other strands of the whip. It's pretty torturous. So, but if they want to get you off the cross, so you don't know how long you're going to be up there. It could be days. But if they want to get you off quickly, what do? They break your legs, because if they break your legs, you can't push yourself up and breathe, and then you suffocate quickly. Okay. Luke 19. John 19. Verse 31. The Jews, therefore, because it was the day of preparation, it was Friday afternoon before the Sabbath, so that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day tied to a feast day, so it was a feast Sabbath. They asked Pilate that the legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other man who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when he saw that he was already dead, he didn't break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately there came out blood and water. And he who has seen is borne witness, and his witness is true, and he knows that he's telling the truth, so that you might believe. That's John saying, I saw it, I saw all of this happen, and now I'm writing it for you so you'll believe. And we can read it today in 2020, November 1st, 2020. For all these things came to pass, verse 36, that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not a bone of him shall be broken. Now, what scripture is that was being fulfilled?
Passover.
Exodus 12, verse 46. No bone broken. 10th to the 14th, unblemished, no bone broken. You getting the picture? Please turn to 1 Peter. Chapter 1. Brethren, this is just in our Vision 2020 reading. That's all it is. It's so good to be reading through the Bible. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17. This is to believers. This is to us. It's to believers. To the church. In particular to, I believe, the Jewish believers then, to whom Peter was writing. But it's a truth that pervades throughout the church, the history of the church. Verse 17, if you address as Father, the one who impartially judges according to each man's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay upon earth, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life, inherited from your forefathers, but you were redeemed with precious blood, as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. Stop there. What could he possibly be talking about? You were redeemed with precious blood, as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. What did John the Baptist say when Jesus was coming to be baptized? What did he call out? Behold the... You all hear that? You think he's just making that up? You think he's throwing words around loosely? What should we call him today? Oh, let's call him a lamb. Oh no, this is all foreordained, preordained, and perfectly orchestrated. What's the Passover about? It's not about, it's about the Messiah. God created Israel, and he gave them the Passover. Pretty dramatic fashion, but they have the Passover. And do this every year. So not only will you remember, but so the world will see it. Every year, whether you even realize it or not, you're proclaiming Messiah. Messiah is Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah. And as you do this every year, and remember the lamb, and remember it's unblemished, and set it aside and test it for 4 days, and don't break any bones. Every year when you do that, you're letting the world know he's coming. Even if you don't realize you're doing it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to realize it. Although it's good if you do. That's the purpose. Now this is not in the Bible. This is just my weak observation. The blood is in the basin on the threshold. And you put it on the lintel and doorpost. And it makes sense. That's how you pass over. See it on the lintel and doorpost. If we were to play connect the dots, this is just me. If we were to play connect the dots, That's what it forms. That's just me. Doesn't say that in the Bible. Now, if this isn't enough, if this doesn't convince you what Exodus 12 is all about, Exodus 12 is not about getting out of Egypt. It's not about Israel. Yes, that's what happens. And yes, it gets the children of Israel into the land eventually in Joshua. But that's not its main point. Its main point is Jesus, the Messiah, is on his way. In fact, that's the main point of everything. But if even this isn't enough to convince you that this Passover is about Jesus, please turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. This is written to a church. Bad news bears. We've talked about them here. Church in Corinth, Greek city, wealthy city, a lot of problems. Young church. One of the problems, which is a pretty big one, is a man in the church is having sex with his father's wife. It's a big problem. What seems to be a bigger problem is the fact the church is okay with it. They're okay with that sin. The Apostle Paul thinks you're arrogant about it, in fact. Chapter 5, verse 6. Your boasting is not good, brethren, in the church. You're boasting about this situation. No, we're cool. It's not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Clean out the old leaven, get rid of the sin, that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact a new lump, or unleavened. Why? For Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. Christ our Passover. Plenty of Jews were in Corinth at the time. They knew precisely what it was saying. Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. And brethren, you read through the Old Testament, you read through the New Testament, you will see Passover, 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 Passover. That's why many of you, if not all of you, even though you have no Jewish roots to you, flowing through your Christian life, it's been the Passover. This is why. Because he is the Passover. It's not just an event. Person. Jesus the Messiah.